She did not scream. She did not cry. She did not slam a single door. When Claire Hartwell walked into her bedroom and found her husband of 7 years tangled with another woman in their bed, she did one thing that would change everything. She walked quietly to his office, opened the bottom drawer, and picked up a USB drive she had been quietly filling for 14 months. Because Claire had known, not everything, not the specifics, but enough, that low hum of wrongness that women learn to ignore because the world tells them it is anxiety, it is hormones, it is imagination. Claire did not ignore it. She documented it, and at 7 months pregnant, with nothing but a hospital bag and a road atlas, she drove north into a Vermont snowstorm and disappeared. Danny Hartwell had money, lawyers, and connections in every room that mattered. What he did not have was any idea what his wife had been building while he was busy underestimating her. Stay with us.
This one is going to surprise you.
Lesson statement. This is a story about what happens when a woman stops waiting to be rescued and starts trusting the intelligence she was told was paranoia. Whatever you are carrying quietly right now, this story is for you. Sometimes the most powerful thing you own is what you chose to save before anyone knew you were paying attention. If you are still here, you already know this story is different. Before we go further, if something in Claire's experience has felt familiar, if you have ever been made to doubt your own memory, your own instincts, your own version of events, leave a 1 in the comments right now. You do not have to explain it. Just 1. We see you. Now let us keep going. If this story stayed with you, here is what we ask. Not much, just this. Hit the like button. Not for us. For every woman who needed to hear that trusting yourself is not paranoia, it is preparation. Leave a comment.
Tell us the moment you knew Claire was going to be okay. Or tell us the moment you recognized something in her story.
Either one. We read every single one. Share this with one person who needs it today. You know who that person is. And if you are new here, subscribe. Because we tell stories like this one every week. Stories about real courage, quiet strength, and the extraordinary things that happen when women stop making themselves small. We will see you in the next one.
They say the moment your life changes forever never looks the way you imagined. Claire Hartwell had imagined it many times. A phone call with bad news, a diagnosis delivered in a sterile office, a car accident on a slick Boston highway in November. She had run through the scenarios the way careful people do, quietly, privately, in the space between sleeping and waking, as if rehearsing for disaster might somehow soften the blow when it finally arrived. She never imagined it would be a shoe, a single Italian loafer, size 11, lying on its side near the hallway baseboard like something dropped in a hurry. Like something dropped by a man who was not thinking about where his shoes landed because he was thinking about something else entirely. Claire stood in the doorway of their brownstone and looked at that shoe for a long moment. She was 34 years old, 7 months pregnant, and she had just driven 40 minutes home from her OB appointment because her 2 o'clock meeting had been canceled, and she actually thought that she might surprise Danny with dinner. She had stopped at the Italian place on Newberry Street. The bag of takeout was still in her left hand, chicken piccata, his favorite. She set the bag on the marble counter. The kitchen was clean, the kind of clean that felt deliberate. She noticed the wine glasses next. 2 of them, rinsed and sitting upside down in the drying rack. Danny did not rinse wine glasses. In 11 years together, 7 of them married, she had never once seen Danny Hartwell rinse a wine glass. Something moved in her chest. not her daughter. Something colder. She noticed his tie draped over the staircase banister, his jacket folded on the second step. A trail, she realized. A trail she was now following without deciding to follow it. The bedroom door was not closed all the way. Claire had been a corporate attorney for 6 years before she left the firm to support Danny's expanding real estate business. She had cross-examined witnesses. She had sat across the tables from men twice her size who lied with extraordinary confidence. She knew what the moment before knowing felt like. She had felt it in courtrooms dozens of times. That particular quality of silence, just before someone says the thing that cannot be unsaid. She pushed the door open. The room was dim, late afternoon light pressing in around the curtain edges. And in the bed, her bed, the bed with the Belgian linen duvet she had ordered from a catalog and waited 6 weeks for, was her husband, and a woman she had never seen before. Young, dark hair spread across Claire's pillow. Danny saw her first. His face went through 4 expressions in under 2 seconds. Claire had time to count them, because she was not moving. She was simply standing in the doorway, one hand resting on her stomach, where her daughter was kicking with the cheerful obliviousness of someone who did not yet know anything about the world. Shock, calculation, performance, contrition. That was the order. Shock first, because he had not heard her come in. Calculation second, because Danny Hartwell's mind moved like a machine and he was already running scenarios. Performance third, because the contrition that followed was not real. She could see it. She had always been able to see it. He said her name. She turned away before he could finish. Her feet carried her to his home office at the end of the hall. Her hands were steady. She registered this distantly, the way you notice unusual weather. Her hands were completely steady as she sat down at his desk and opened the bottom drawer. Behind the hanging files, in the back left corner, was a small USB drive she had put there 14 months ago. She had begun saving things 14 months ago. She was not entirely sure what she had been saving them for. She told herself at the time that she was being paranoid. Careful. She was a lawyer. Lawyers kept records. It had nothing to do with the late nights, or the new password on his phone, or the way he sometimes looked at her like she was a problem he was managing rather than a person he had chosen. The drive contained 2 years of financial records, screenshots of wire transfers to accounts she did not recognize, emails she had found and photographed, recordings of 3 conversations made legally under Massachusetts law, in which Danny said things to her that she had later looked up under the clinical heading of emotional manipulation. She plugged the drive into his laptop, added everything from the last 3 months, ejected it, put it in the pocket of her maternity cardigan. From the bedroom came the sound of movement, clothing. His voice, low and urgent, speaking to someone who was not Claire. She stood up. She walked to their shared closet and pulled out the hospital bag she had packed at 30 weeks because her OB said to be ready. It sat behind her winter coats. She had told Danny she packed it. He had nodded and gone back to his phone. She picked up the bag. She walked to the nightstand on her side of the bed and picked up her phone and her charger. Then she walked to Danny's nightstand, opened the small drawer, and removed a Rolex watch with a worn leather strap. Her father had given it to Danny on their wedding day. Her father, who had died the following spring. The watch had come from her father's estate, and technically, legally, it was hers. Danny appeared in the bedroom doorway. He was wearing his robe. His face had settled on the contrition expression, and he was holding it there with some effort. He said, "Claire, just listen to me for 1 minute." She looked at him once. Then she walked past him, down the hallway, past the Italian loafer still lying on its side by the baseboard, and out the front door. She did not slam it. She pulled it shut behind her with a small, precise click. The November air hit her face, and she stood on the brownstone steps for exactly 3 seconds. Then she walked to her car, put the hospital bag in the back seat, and started the engine. She drove 2 blocks before her hands started shaking. She pulled into a gas station on Com Ave and sat with the engine running. Her phone was buzzing already. Danny's name on the screen, over and over. She turned the phone face down on the passenger seat. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel. Her daughter kicked, hard, as if to say, I am here. I am still here. Claire sat up straight. She pulled out the worn road atlas she kept in the door pocket, a habit from before smartphones that Danny had always made fun of. She opened it across the steering wheel. Her finger traced Route 93 north out of Boston, into New Hampshire, into Vermont, just north, just away. She had no plan. She had a USB drive, a hospital bag, a road atlas, and her father's watch. She had a daughter who was kicking, with remarkable enthusiasm, for someone who had no idea what was happening. She thought, that will have to be enough. She pulled out of the gas station and drove north. The snow started somewhere around Montpellier. Not aggressive snow, quiet snow. The kind that falls straight down in the dark, like the sky is simply shedding something it no longer needs. Claire had been driving for 4 hours. She had stopped once for gas, paid cash, and eaten a granola bar from the bottom of the hospital bag. The baby was quiet now. The radio was playing an old Carole King song on a station that was starting to fade. She found Millhaven, Vermont by accident. Route 2 East, exit unmarked. She took it because her back was aching, and she needed to stop, and the next town, on the atlas, was still 18 miles ahead. The road curved through dark pines and then opened onto a main street with old buildings and a hardware store and a diner with its lights still on. 1 traffic light, 1 church, 1 pie shop with a hand-lettered sign in the window that read, Marge's Pie and Coffee. Open late because Marge doesn't sleep anyway. Claire pulled into the small parking lot beside it. She sat in the car for a moment. Through the window, she could see a woman behind a counter, silver-haired, moving with the particular efficiency of someone who has been working in the same space for 30 years and knows exactly where everything is without looking. Claire got out of the car. The cold hit her immediately. Vermont cold, which is a different thing from Boston cold. Boston cold is rude. Vermont cold is simply honest. She pushed open the door and a bell chimed above her and warmth rushed out to meet her, along with the smell of butter and cinnamon and coffee and something that made her throat tighten in a way she was not expecting. It smelled like her grandmother's kitchen. It smelled like something she had not thought about in years. The woman behind the counter looked up. She was in her late 60s, silver hair pulled back with a clip that had a small daisy on it. She was wearing a flannel shirt and an apron that read, The Boss, in block letters. Her eyes were blue and sharp, and they took in Claire's situation. The pregnant belly, the city clothes, the eyes that had clearly been crying, even if Claire herself would have denied it, in about 2 seconds flat. She said, You look like you've had a day. Claire said, That's one way to put it. Sit down. I'll get you decaf. I don't need... Sit down, honey. Your feet are swollen, and you've been driving in snow. Sit. Claire sat. The counter stool was vinyl, red, slightly cracked on one side. She folded her hands around the coffee mug the woman set in front of her and felt some locked thing in her chest begin very slightly to loosen. I'm Marge, the woman said. This is my place. You need pie. I'm not really hungry. That wasn't a question. Marge was already cutting a slice of something golden and fragrant. Apple with a cheddar crust. She set it on the counter with a fork. You from Boston? Claire looked up. How did you know? Your coat. Nobody in Vermont buys a coat that color. Where are you headed? I'm not sure yet. Marge looked at her steadily. Running from something or running to something? I'm not running, Claire said. Then, after a pause, I'm relocating spontaneously. Marge made a sound that might have been a laugh. That's the most lawyer answer I've ever heard, and I've lived next to an attorney for 20 years. Eat your pie. Claire ate her pie. It was, objectively, the best thing she had eaten in recent memory, and she had eaten at some very expensive restaurants. The bell above the door chimed again. A man came in, stamping snow off his boots, tall, lean, dark flannel jacket, with a volunteer fire department patch on the sleeve. Dark hair, with a little gray at the temples. He was carrying 2 paper bags from what looked like a hardware store. He stopped when he saw Claire, looked at his mother, looked at Claire, looked at his mother again. Marge said, "Connor, this is..." She looked at Claire. "Claire," Claire said. "This is Claire. She's relocating spontaneously. Set those bags down and get yourself some coffee." Connor Kowalski set the bags down and got himself some coffee and sat 2 stools away from Claire, with the careful body language of a man who was not entirely sure what was happening, but had enough sense not to ask too many questions. He had gray-green eyes and hands that were clearly used to actual work. He looked like a man who fixed things. He said, "Snowing pretty good out there." "Yes," Claire said. "Road okay coming in?" I slid a little on the curve near the exit. "Yeah, that curve's bad. Town's been arguing about putting up a warning sign for 11 years. He drank his coffee. They'll probably get around to it. Something about his complete lack of performance, no charm offensive, no attempt to be interesting, struck her as the most restful thing she had encountered in a very long time. Marge appeared from the back with a fresh pot of coffee and a look on her face that Claire would come to recognize as the look she wore when she was deciding something. "I've got a room above the shop," Marge said. "My husband passed 3 years ago. Nobody's using it. It smells like Old Spice and 40 years of unprocessed feelings, but it's got a good bed and a bathroom and a lock on the door." Claire said, "I couldn't impose." "You're not imposing. I'm offering. There's a difference." Marge poured coffee with the finality of someone who has already made up their mind. $600 a month, utilities included, no drama. Claire almost laughed at that. "I can pay 3 months up front," she said, thinking of the personal savings account she had opened 18 months ago, quietly, in her own name alone, at a bank Danny did not use. She had been moving money into it slowly. She had told herself she was being paranoid. She was grateful now for her paranoia. "Then it's settled," Marge said. "Connor, take her bag up the back stairs." Connor stood without comment and picked up the hospital bag from where Claire had set it by the door. He carried it toward the back of the shop. He did not make a production of it. Claire sat at the counter for another moment. She pulled out her phone and looked at it. 22 missed calls. 14 texts. She did not read any of them. She opened the banking app and confirmed the balance in her personal account. Enough? For now? Enough. She thought about what a therapist she had seen briefly, 3 years ago, had said about the moment before a person changes. She had said it rarely feels like courage. It mostly feels like exhaustion that has run out of alternatives. Claire put her phone face down on the counter. She looked at Marge, who was wiping down the coffee machine with the focused attention of someone who is giving you privacy by pretending to be busy. She said, "The pie really is exceptional." Marge did not look up. "I know it is, honey. I've been making it for 40 years. The room above Marge's pie and coffee was small and warm and smelled, as advertised, of Old Spice. There was a quilt on the bed that had clearly been made by hand, a braided rug on the floor, a window that looked out onto the alley behind the shop, and beyond that, a small yard where a woodpile stood covered in snow. A bathroom with a claw-foot tub that Claire decided immediately she was going to use every single day. She did not sleep well that first night. The baby moved for hours, restless, and Claire lay on her side, with one hand on her stomach, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a small town settling into quiet. No traffic, no bass from the apartment below, no sound of Danny's phone buzzing on the nightstand. In the morning, she sat at the small desk by the window and opened her laptop. She needed to understand exactly what she was carrying. The USB drive contained 2 years of careful documentation. She had started saving things the winter before last, after a night when Danny had spoken to her for 40 minutes in a calm, quiet voice, explaining why she had misremembered a conversation they'd had, why her version of events was, as he put it, emotionally colored rather than factually accurate. He had done this before. He would present her own memories back to her, slightly altered, until she genuinely could not trust what she had experienced. She had sat with that feeling afterward and thought, I need to start writing things down. So she had. Dates and times in a private document, screenshots of texts, 3 recorded conversations because Massachusetts is a one-party consent state, and she had been a lawyer long enough to know the difference between paranoid and prepared. And then 8 months ago, she had found the financial documents. She had been looking for a receipt for the dishwasher repair, which Danny had said was filed in his office. She found it. She also found, in the same drawer, a folder she did not recognize containing wire transfer confirmations to an account she had never seen, totaling $900,000 over 18 months. She had photographed everything and replaced the folder exactly as she found it. She had sat very still in Danny's office chair for a long time. Then she had gotten up and made dinner and said nothing. Now, in the room above the pie shop, she opened the files and went through them systematically. The wire transfers, the emails between Danny and a man named Gerald Ford, who was, she had since confirmed via public records, a zoning official for the city of Boston. The emails were careful, but not careful enough. A lawyer could read them. A prosecutor certainly could. She opened a new document and began writing a summary. Clear, precise, organized. The way she had once written case briefs. She did not hear the knock at first. Claire, Marge's voice through the door. Breakfast is ready if you want it. And there's someone on the phone downstairs who says she's your sister. Claire went still. She had called her sister Rebecca from the road the night before. Left a voicemail. She had said only, I'm okay. I'm somewhere safe. I'll explain soon. She went downstairs. Rebecca's voice on the landline was tight with the particular tension of someone who has been up all night worrying. Claire, what is happening? Danny called me at 6 a.m, saying you had some kind of breakdown and left, and he's worried sick. And where are you? I didn't have a breakdown, Claire said. I came home early and found him in bed with another woman. Silence. Rebecca, I'm here. A long exhale. Oh, Claire. I have evidence of financial misconduct too. I have a lawyer I'm going to contact today. I need you to not tell Danny where I am. Of course I won't tell. Rebecca paused. Claire, he called Jennifer too. Claire's hand tightened on the phone. Jennifer Marsh had been her best friend since law school. They had been in each other's weddings. Jennifer had known about the financial documents, not all of it, but enough. Claire had said too much, one night over too much wine, about what she had found. What did he tell Jennifer? Claire asked. He told her you were having a mental health crisis, that the pregnancy had made you unstable, and he was worried about the baby, and he needed to know if Jennifer had noticed any concerning behavior. The room was very quiet. He's building a narrative, Claire said. more to herself than to Rebecca. What? He's already building his narrative. Before I've even called a lawyer. She pressed her hand against her stomach. The baby was still. Listening, it felt like. Rebecca, I need you to trust me. I was not having a crisis. I was having a completely rational response to an entirely rational set of facts. I know, honey. I know. Don't contact him. Don't tell him anything about this call. Claire, where are you? She looked out the window of Marge's shop into the quiet Vermont morning. Snow on the window boxes, a cardinal sitting on the fence. Connor Kowalski's truck pulling out of the alley with a load of firewood in the bed. Somewhere I can think, she said. After she hung up, she sat at the counter. Marge set a plate of eggs in front of her without comment. My husband, Claire said, is going to try to make people think I'm unstable. Marge pulled up a stool on the other side of the counter. And are you? No. Then that'll be a hard case to make. She poured 2 coffees. What are you going to do about it? Claire looked at her eggs, then she looked at Marge. I need to find an attorney, a good one, someone who doesn't know my husband. My son knows a woman in Burlington, Diane Fletcher. She handled his divorce a few years back. Marge sipped her coffee. She's like a very well-dressed Rottweiler. That's exactly what I need, Claire said. Diane Fletcher's office occupied the top floor of a converted Victorian on Church Street in Burlington. Connor drove Claire the hour south in his truck, which smelled of sawdust and pine. He did not ask her to explain her situation. He did not offer opinions. He listened to a country radio station at low volume, and once, when the roads got slick going through Waterbury, he said, "Patch of black ice here," in the same tone he might use to say the coffee was ready. Claire sat with her hands in her lap and looked out the window at Lake Champlain appearing between the hills and felt, oddly, like she could breathe. Diane Fletcher was 55, slim, wearing a charcoal blazer, and the expression of a woman who has heard everything and is startled by nothing. She shook Claire's hand with a firm grip and gestured to a chair. Tell me everything, she said. Start from the beginning, and don't leave anything out, because I will figure out anything you leave out eventually, and it's easier for both of us if I have it now. Claire told her everything. It took 45 minutes. Diane took notes without interrupting. When Claire finished, Diane sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. The wire transfers, she said. You're certain of the amounts? $940,000 over 18 months. I have the confirmation numbers. And the emails with the zoning official. 17 emails. I have screenshots of all of them. Diane nodded slowly. Claire, this is not just a divorce case. I know. What's on that drive could result in federal charges against your husband, wire fraud, tax evasion, potentially bribery. I know. You understand that he will fight with everything he has to discredit you. I know that too. Diane looked at her directly. Good. Because the first thing he's going to do is go after your fitness as a mother. He'll claim instability, abandonment of the marital home, possibly theft of company documents. He will try to make this about you rather than about him. Claire felt the familiar cold settle in her chest. What do we do? We document everything from this moment forward. Every phone call, every text, every contact from him or his representatives. We establish your mental stability proactively, which means I want you seeing a therapist. Not because you need it. Diane raised a hand. Although frankly, given what you've described, it wouldn't hurt. But because I want a licensed professional on record stating that you are a competent, stable, caring mother-to-be. Okay? And we file first, today, if possible. I want our divorce petition in before his. I want adultery on the record, emotional abuse on the record, and financial misconduct on the record. Diane picked up her pen. He's been building his narrative for 12 hours. We start building ours right now. Connor was in the waiting area when Claire came out. He looked up from a 3-month-old copy of Field and Stream. How'd it go? He asked. She's going to file today, Claire said. She called it financial misconduct, emotional abuse, and adultery. Connor stood up. That cover everything? Claire considered. Pretty thoroughly, yes. They walked back to the truck in the cold Burlington afternoon. Claire felt the USB drive in her pocket, solid and small and heavier than something that size had any right to be. She thought about what Diane had said about building a narrative, and she thought about the 14 months she had spent quietly, carefully, building exactly that. She had not known at the time what she was building. She had thought she was being paranoid. She was grateful, again, for her paranoia. In the truck, halfway back to Millhaven, Connor said, "My ex-wife used to say I was incapable of talking about my feelings." Claire looked at him. "Why are you telling me that?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Because you've been sitting there very quietly for about 20 minutes, and I think you might be in your head too much, and the only way I know to interrupt that is to say something unexpected." Claire looked at him for another moment. Then she said, "Did she have a point? Your ex-wife?" "Probably. I'm better with lumber than with emotions." A pause. "But I'm working on it." Something about the complete plainness of this made Claire laugh. Actually laugh, not the polite social laugh she had deployed at cocktail parties for years. A real laugh surprised out of her. Connor glanced over briefly, and the corner of his mouth lifted. 3 weeks passed. Claire settled into a routine. Mornings helping Marge in the shop, which she was initially terrible at, in ways that Marge described with colorful precision. Her first attempt at a pie crust was characterized as geological. Her second was, according to Marge, an act of violence against pastry. By the 3rd week, she was producing something that Marge described as not embarrassing, which Claire understood to be high praise. She saw a therapist named Dr. Walsh via video call twice a week. She slept better. She walked the snowy streets of Millhaven in the mornings, her breath making clouds in the cold air. Her daughter, kicking with consistent enthusiasm. She checked her phone once a day, in the evenings, for anything from Diane. She did not check it the evening the email arrived. She was asleep early, the deep sleep of someone whose body is doing serious work. She did not see it until morning. It was from Diane's office, a legal filing from Danny's attorney. She opened it at the counter with her decaf, while Marge was in the back and Connor was loading wood. She read the first paragraph. Then she read it again. Then she set the phone face down on the counter and sat very still. Jennifer Marsh, attorney at law, had signed an affidavit on behalf of Daniel Hartwell's legal team. In it, she described observing her friend, Claire Hartwell, exhibiting what she called escalating emotional instability over the preceding 18 months. She described an incident at a restaurant where Claire had become, in Jennifer's words, disproportionately upset over a minor slight. She described Claire's behavior as paranoid and cited several conversations in which Claire had expressed unfounded suspicions about her husband. Jennifer, who had held her hand through 3 rounds of fertility treatments. Jennifer, who had sat at this very kitchen table, metaphorically, on a late-night phone call, while Claire whispered about the wire transfers she had found and swore her to secrecy. Jennifer, who now remembered those conversations as evidence of Claire's instability, rather than as the private confidences of a woman trying to understand something alarming she had discovered. Marge came out from the back with a tray of muffins and stopped when she saw Claire's face. She set the tray down. She came around the counter and sat on the stool next to Claire. She did not say anything for a moment. "Jennifer," Claire said finally. "Your friend," Marge said. It was not a question. "My best friend." Claire's voice was very steady. She was a lawyer. She knew how to be steady when her insides were not. She signed an affidavit for Danny's legal team, calling me unstable, describing incidents from our private conversations as evidence of paranoid behavior. Marge was quiet. He got to her first, Claire said. He called her before I even had a lawyer, while I was still on Route 93. She pressed her hand flat against the counter. He's been planning this longer than I realized. Did she know about your evidence? She knew I had found something financial. I told her one night when I'd had too much wine and too much fear and I needed to tell someone. Claire looked at the phone. I told her because she was my person, because that's what you do with your person. Marge put her hand over Claire's. She said, "Baby, sometimes your person is just someone who hasn't been tested yet." Claire looked at her. Marge said, "The ones who hold up under pressure, those are the real ones. You're finding out which kind she was. It hurts like hell, but better to know now than to keep giving that kind of person your secrets." Connor came through the back door with an armful of wood and read the room in about 2 seconds. He set the wood down quietly and started stacking it by the fireplace without being asked. Claire called Diane. Diane said, "I saw it. I'm already on it. Do you know if Jennifer received anything of value from your husband or his business in the last few months?" "I don't know. I'm going to find out," Diane said, in a tone that made Claire glad she was not Jennifer Marsh. "Claire, listen. This is a setback. It is not a fatal blow. His lawyer's trying to rattle you. Don't be rattled." "I'm not rattled," Claire said. "Good, because next week gets harder. His team is filing for emergency custody on the basis that you have abandoned the marital home and are a flight risk. We are going to fight it, but I need you solid." Claire looked out the window at the snowy street, at the hardware store across the way, at the cardinal on the fence post, which she had come to think of as a permanent resident. "I'm solid," she said. She was, almost. That night she wrote in the journal she had started keeping since arriving in Millhaven. She wrote about Jennifer, about what it costs to discover that a person you trusted has been converted into a weapon against you, about the way betrayal from a friend lands differently than betrayal from a husband, softer in some ways, because you love them differently, and harder in others, for exactly the same reason. She wrote, "The most dangerous thing I ever did was make myself small enough to fit into Danny's life. The second most dangerous was trusting people he could reach." She closed the journal. She pressed her hands against her stomach and felt her daughter shift and settle. "I know," she said quietly. "Me too." The first catastrophic event happened on a Tuesday. A Boston gossip blog, the kind that covered local wealth and real estate and what it delicately called domestic developments among the city's notable families, published a piece titled, "Where is Claire Hartwell?" It described her as having fled the family home following what sources close to Daniel Hartwell described as a mental health episode. It mentioned Vermont, not Millhaven specifically, Vermont. The comments were 347 in number by the time Marge found the article and showed it to Claire. Claire read 12 of them before she stopped. They described her as unstable, ungrateful, as a woman who had everything and threw a tantrum. Several speculated about the baby, with a casualness that made Claire's hands shake. The safety of being unknown, which she had carried like a physical warmth since arriving in Millhaven, dissolved in an afternoon. She walked into the pie shop that afternoon to find 2 women she recognized from the general store whispering near the window, and she knew that Millhaven was small enough that unknown was no longer an option. She told Marge. Marge said, unprintably, what she thought of gossip blogs and the people who wrote for them. And then she said, "You don't hide. You go about your business, and you let them stare. People here know me. You're with me. That counts. It helped. Not entirely, but it helped. The second catastrophic event happened on a Thursday. Claire was in the pie shop kitchen attempting a batch of snickerdoodles, which she had chosen because they were forgiving and she needed something forgiving. She had been on her feet since 6, and her back had been aching for 2 days, and she had not slept well, and she had been trying very hard not to think about the emergency custody filing. She dropped the mixing bowl, reached for it. The room tilted. She heard Marge's voice from very far away. She felt the floor against her knees. She thought, distinctly and clearly, this cannot happen. Then she stopped thinking clearly. Connor was there. She was not certain how. Only that one moment she was on the kitchen floor and the next she was in the passenger seat of his truck. Moving fast on a clear road, and he was on his phone with one hand and driving with the other. She said, "I'm okay." "You're not okay. You passed out." "I didn't pass out, Claire." His voice was very steady, the voice he probably used at fire scenes. "You went down in the kitchen. I carried you out. We are 40 minutes from Burlington General, and I need you to stay awake." The baby was moving. That steadied her. She pressed her hand flat on her stomach and felt the movement and breathed. Burlington General. A room. A doctor with a kind face and a serious expression. Stress-related episode. The baby was okay. The baby's heart rate was strong, the doctor said, with the particular admiration of a professional for something doing its job well under pressure. But Claire needed to reduce her stress load and increase her rest and eliminate, to whatever degree possible, the sources of acute anxiety. Claire looked at the ceiling of the exam room. "My source of acute anxiety," she said, "is a 6'2" man with an 8-figure net worth and a very good legal team." The doctor said gently, "I'll put that in the notes." She was alone in the room for a while before the nurse came back with discharge paperwork. She lay there and did the thing she had been refusing to do since arriving in Vermont. She let herself be frightened, not for herself, but for her daughter. That particular fear was different from any other fear she had ever known. It had no bottom to it. It went down and down. She was still in that fear when the nurse opened the door and said, "Your friend is still in the waiting room if you want him to come in." Claire said, "He's here? He hasn't moved in 3 hours." She was quiet for a moment. "Yes, send him in." Connor came in with a coffee from the hospital cafeteria in each hand and the expression of a man who had been worrying hard and was not going to make a production of it. He handed her the coffee. He sat in the chair by the bed. He said, "Baby's okay?" "Yes." He nodded. They sat in silence for a while, and it was, she thought, the most comfortable silence she had experienced in years. Danny's silences had always had something in them. A test, a judgment, a waiting. Connor's silence was just silence. He was simply there. The third catastrophic event happened on a Friday. Danny's car was a silver Mercedes that Claire recognized from 40 feet away. It pulled up in front of Marge's at 9 in the morning, and he got out in a gray cashmere coat and stood on the sidewalk of Mill Haven, Vermont, like a man who intended to be noticed. He came into the shop with flowers, yellow tulips. He handed them to Marge with a smile that had worked on most people most of his life. "You must be Margaret, Danny Hartwell. I've heard wonderful things about this place." Marge took the flowers and set them on the counter without looking at them. "We're not open for another 20 minutes. I'm just hoping to speak with my wife." "Your wife," Marge said, "is not here." This was technically true. Claire, who had seen the car from the upstairs window, was standing in the doorway to the back hallway with her phone recording audio and her heart hammering with something that was not quite fear. It was something sharper than fear. It was the recognition of a pattern. He had found her. The blog had been the first step, and this was the second. He had been patient, which meant he had been planning. He settled into his charming persona, talking to the two customers who had come in for morning coffee, asking about the town, complimenting the decor. He was very good at this. He had always been very good at this. Connor came through the back door. He took in the scene in one look. He walked to the counter and said, "Sir, we're not open yet. Can I help you with something?" Danny looked at him with the particular assessment he gave to people he had decided were beneath him. A look so practiced that most people missed it. "I'm just visiting my wife." Connor said, "Your wife has a protective order filed in Suffolk County. You want to take a minute with that before you continue this visit." "That order isn't finalized," Danny said. His smile stayed perfectly in place. "So technically, you're in a small town in Vermont," Connor said, "where my family has lived for 3 generations, and every person in this room knows us. You want to keep going with technically?" Danny looked at him for a long moment, then he smiled broader and said, "Just passing through. Beautiful town." He nodded at Marge and walked out. Claire stayed in the back hallway, her phone still recording. She heard his car start. She did not move for a long time. That evening, she walked out to find her car with 2 flat tires. She could not prove who had done it. She could not prove anything. She sat on the steps of the pie shop in the cold and put her face in her hands. Marge sat beside her. The cold was hard and clear, and the sky above Millhaven was dense with stars. Marge said, "I had a husband once who thought fear was a tool, not as rich as yours, not as polished, but the same eyes." Claire said, "What did you do?" Marge said, "I built a pie shop that's been here 32 years, and I raised a son who drove 90 miles an hour to Burlington on a Thursday morning without being asked." She paused. "The thing about men like that is they need you afraid. The minute you're not, they've got nothing." Claire looked up at the stars. She thought about the USB drive in her pocket, about Diane Fletcher in Burlington who was, at that very moment, building a case that would make Danny Hartwell's worst fears feel optimistic. She thought, "I am not afraid. I am determined." Those feel similar from the outside. They are entirely different things. The settlement offer arrived on a Wednesday morning, 6 weeks after Claire had left Boston. Diane called at 8 o'clock with a tone of carefully managed neutrality that told Claire this was something to pay attention to. Full custody of the baby to Claire. Permanent relocation rights, meaning she could stay in Vermont. Generous support payments, monthly, for 18 years. A lump sum for housing. And a clean, uncontested divorce. In exchange, the financial documents on the USB drive would be treated as confidential within the divorce proceeding, not referred to any external investigative authority. Claire sat with her coffee at the counter in Marge's. Marge had gone to the wholesale market. Connor was in the back, repairing a section of rotten floor joist. She could hear his hammer, steady and rhythmic. She thought about what the offer meant. It meant the baby would be safe. It meant she would never have to set foot in a Boston courtroom while 8 months pregnant. It meant no more private investigators, no more gossip blogs, no more flat tires that she couldn't prove were his fault. It meant Danny walked away from $900,000 in fraudulent transfers, from the emails with Gerald Ford, the zoning official, from everything she had spent 14 months carefully documenting. She said to Diane, "What is he protecting that's worth more than what he's offering?" There was a beat of silence. Then Diane said, "Now you're thinking like a lawyer. I was always thinking like a lawyer. What is it?" Gerald Ford, the zoning official, is under a separate investigation. Nothing to do with us. The city's ethics board opened a complaint 3 months ago about permits on a development project in Charlestown. Your documents would be corroborating evidence in that investigation. Diane paused. If Ford talks, and investigations suggest he may, your husband could be looking at federal charges. The divorce settlement is containment. He's trying to buy your silence before Ford talks. Claire closed her eyes. She wanted to say yes. She could feel how much she wanted to say yes. The exhaustion of it, the weeks of stress and fear and the hospital visit and the tires and Jennifer's betrayal, it all pressed against her like a physical weight. She was 8 months pregnant. She was tired in a way that went down to her bone marrow. She thought about her daughter. She thought about what she wanted her daughter to know. About the world. About what you do when someone who hurt you offers you money to be quiet about it. She said, add a permanent restraining order, and I want a written, on-record admission of the adultery and the pattern of emotional coercion, not just in the divorce decree, on the public record. Diane said, he won't go for that. Then we go to court. She pressed her hand flat on the counter. Diane, I was an attorney. I know what a public record means. It means the next woman he does this to has something to find. There was a long pause. Okay, Diane said. I'll communicate our position. That afternoon, Marge came back from the wholesale market, and Connor finished the floor joist, and they all had soup at the counter, and Marge told a story about a customer who had once tried to return a pie 3 days after eating most of it, claiming it had been defective, and Claire laughed until her stomach hurt in the best possible way. Connor, washing bowls at the small sink, said without turning around, you made a decision today. How do you know? You look different. Lighter? She considered this. I turned down a settlement offer. He turned around. That sounds like the opposite of lighter. It is and it isn't. She folded her hands on the counter. He was trying to buy my silence. I decided my silence wasn't for sale. Connor looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, good, and went back to washing bowls. That night he found her in the small back garden, looking at the stars, which were extraordinary in Vermont, in a way they never were in Boston. He came and stood beside her with 2 mugs of tea. After a long while he said, I don't say things like this very well. She said, that's okay. My ex-wife used to say I communicated mostly in actions. What actions do you want to take right now? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, whatever happens next, the court case, the baby, all of it. You don't have to do it alone. She looked at his profile in the dark, strong, and careful. Connor, you know she isn't. I know, he said. I'm here anyway. That's the whole point. He kept his eyes on the stars. That's actually the only point. Her throat tightened. She looked away. After a moment, she said, that's the most words you've said consecutively since I met you. Don't get used to it, he said. I peeked. She laughed. He smiled. And somewhere between the cold and the stars and the steam from their mugs, something shifted into place like a key finding a lock. The shocking call came on a Sunday. Claire was in the apartment, folding baby clothes that Marge had brought from a church sale. Tiny things in yellow and white. The phone rang with a number she didn't recognize, Boston area code. She answered because Diane had told her to document all contact. Claire? A woman's voice. Older, careful. This is Sandra Hartwell. Claire sat down on the bed. Danny's mother? She had expected, if she ever heard from Sandra at all, anger, blame. The protective fury of a mother whose son was under legal threat. She had prepared for that. She had a response rehearsed. She was not prepared for what Sandra actually said. I know you don't have any reason to trust me. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to listen for 3 minutes." Claire said nothing. She pressed record on her phone. Sandra said, "There was a woman before you, Danny's first marriage. I don't know how much you know about it." Claire knew he had been married briefly before. He had described it as a youthful mistake, quickly dissolved. He had been vague in the way he was always vague, about things he wanted you not to look at too closely. "Her name is Patricia," Sandra said. "She signed an NDA as part of the divorce settlement. She received money, and she went away, and she was not allowed to describe what had happened to her during that marriage." A pause. "I have letters Danny wrote during that time. I kept them because I was afraid. I told myself I kept them for no reason. I was lying to myself." Claire pressed her free hand flat on her knee. "He said the same things about Patricia that he's saying about you," Sandra said. "Unstable, paranoid, emotionally compromised. He had people who said it for him then too." Her voice was very controlled. Too controlled, the control of someone who has been carrying something for a long time. "Claire, I should have stopped it the first time. I didn't. I believed him over her because he was my son, and it was easier to believe him." A pause. "I can't do it again?" Claire's heart was hitting her ribs. "What are you offering?" she asked. Her voice was steady. She had been a lawyer. "Patricia's phone number, and the letters, and my testimony, if your attorney believes it would be useful." Claire thought about what this meant, about Danny's entire narrative, the devoted husband with the mentally unstable wife, crumbling from its own foundation, about a judge hearing not about one woman's alleged instability, but about a pattern, a deliberate, repeated pattern with different women, same strategy, same words. She thought about Patricia, whoever she was who had signed an NDA and gone away and never been able to tell anyone what had happened to her. She said, "Sandra, why now?" A very long pause. "I have a granddaughter coming," Sandra said. "I want to be someone she can be told about." Claire sat in the tiny Vermont apartment with baby clothes in her lap and the phone pressed to her ear, and she breathed very carefully. Then she said, "I'm going to give you my attorney's number." The Boston courthouse on a gray November morning. Claire walked up the steps in a simple navy maternity dress that she and Marge had chosen together, deliberate and measured, nothing that could be described as dramatic or erratic. Her hair was down. She was wearing her grandmother's pearl earrings. She was 8.5 months pregnant, and she walked up those steps with the posture of someone who had nothing to apologize for, because she didn't. Diane was beside her. Connor was behind her, in a dark jacket that he had clearly borrowed, and that did not quite fit across the shoulders. And his expression was the focused expression of a man who has decided something and is acting on it. He had simply shown up that morning at 4:30 a.m. to drive her. She had not asked him to. Marge had given him coffee in a thermos and kissed Claire on the cheek and said, "Call me the second it's done." The courtroom was full. Danny was at the opposing table, immaculate, his legal team arranged around him in expensive suits. He looked up when Claire entered. He managed a look of wounded concern that she could see from across the room was for the judge, a woman in her 60s named Eleanor Price, who had been on the family court bench for 22 years and whose expression suggested she had seen every performance there was to see. Danny's attorney opened with the prepared case: abandonment of the marital home, erratic behavior documented by multiple witnesses. Claire's unfitness to be a primary caregiver based on the episode in Vermont when she had, and here the attorney used the phrase, lost consciousness, in what was described as a high-stress environment, suggesting instability. Diane let him finish. Then she stood up and played a recording. It was the audio from Claire's phone from the morning Danny had come to Marge's. His voice, warm and charming for the locals. And then, in the parking lot, after Connor had stepped between them, a different tone. Quiet, cold, precise. The comment about the restraining order not being finalized. The word technically used like a blade. Judge Price listened with no expression. Diane said, "Your Honor, this is not a case about Claire Hartwell's stability. This is a case about a documented pattern of behavior by Daniel Hartwell toward the women in his life. We have evidence of financial misconduct totaling nearly $1 million. We have recordings demonstrating emotional coercion. We have a witness." She paused. "We have his mother." Danny's composure cracked, just slightly around the eyes. Sandra Hartwell took the stand. She wore a gray suit and held her hands very still in her lap. She answered Diane's questions in a measured, clear voice. She described what she had witnessed during Danny's first marriage. She described the letters. She described a conversation she had overheard years ago in which Danny had explained to a friend how to document a wife's behavior in ways that could later be used against her. Jennifer Marsh was called to the stand. Under cross-examination, Diane established that 3 weeks before Jennifer had signed her affidavit, a consulting fee of $40,000 had been deposited from a company registered to Daniel Hartwell into an account associated with Jennifer Marsh, LLC. Jennifer's carefully prepared composure developed cracks at that point. She asked twice to speak with her own attorney. She ultimately recanted the characterization of Claire as unstable. Her voice was barely audible. Danny's legal team requested a recess. During the recess, in the courthouse hallway, Danny walked toward Claire, his legal team behind him, his face composed into something that might have been mistaken for reasonableness. He said, "Claire, we can still settle this today. Same terms. Let's not do this to each other." Connor stepped to Claire's left. Claire looked at Danny Hartwell. She looked at him the way she had not allowed herself to look at him in 11 years, without softening it, without making herself smaller to make it easier for him. She looked at him with the complete clarity of a woman who had spent 14 months building a case and 6 weeks in Vermont, remembering who she was. She said, "The only terms I'm interested in are already in our filing, Danny." She walked back into the courtroom. Judge Price's ruling took 40 minutes to deliver. Full custody to Claire, permanent restraining order, divorce on grounds of adultery and emotional abuse on the public record per Claire's requirement. The financial documents were referred to the appropriate federal authorities. Judge Price noted on the record that the pattern of behavior documented in the case was consistent, systematic, and deliberately designed to undermine the respondent's credibility and autonomy. Outside the courthouse, the November sleet was the same sleet from the night she had driven north on Route 93, or it felt like the same sleet, like the universe completing a loop. Connor was waiting at the bottom of the steps with an umbrella he was holding, with the slightly uncertain posture of a man who did not regularly carry umbrellas. She reached him, and he opened it over them both. He said, "You ready to go home?" She thought about what he meant by home. The room above Marge's, the counter with the cracked red vinyl stool, the clawfoot tub, the sound of the cardinal on the fence in the morning, the smell of pie and coffee and pine and Vermont winter. She said, "Yes." They were 40 minutes south of Burlington when she said, "Connor? Yeah. I think my water just broke." A beat of silence. He looked at her. She looked at him. He said, "In the truck." "I'm sorry." He said, "Okay." He was already reaching for his phone, already accelerating, already completely calm in the way he was calm at fire scenes. "Okay, Burlington General, 22 minutes. You don't have to." Claire. He did not look away from the road. Stop finishing that sentence. I'm here. That's it. That's the whole thing, she breathed. The sleet was coming down steadily. His hands were steady on the wheel. She thought distantly about the woman she had been 11 years ago, who had married a man because he was confident and successful and made her feel chosen, who had spent years making herself smaller and quieter to fit inside a life that was never hers. She thought, that woman also made 14 months of careful, quiet notes and saved a USB drive behind a folder in a bottom drawer and knew, on some level, that never stopped knowing, that she deserved better. She had listened to herself. Eventually. That had been the whole thing. The lights of Burlington appeared through the sleet. Almost there, Connor said. I know, she said. I know. Grace Ellen Hartwell was born at 8:43 p.m. On a Thursday in November at Burlington General Hospital, with a cry that the attending nurse described as emphatic. She had Claire's eyes and dark hair, and from the first minutes of her life, she held on to whatever she could reach with a grip that surprised everyone in the room. Marge arrived at the hospital at 11 p.m. with 3 pies in a carrier bag. She said she hadn't known what the situation called for and had brought options. There was apple cheddar, blueberry, and something she called a victory pie, which was coconut cream with a slightly erratic meringue. Connor was already there. He had been in the waiting room since 8:15. He came in when Marge arrived, wearing the borrowed jacket that didn't fit across the shoulders, and he held Grace with the particular carefulness of a man who builds things and understands the value of proper handling. He said, "She's perfect." Marge, looking over his shoulder, said, "She looks like her mother, strong face." Connor said, without looking up from Grace, "Yes, she does." Claire watched them from the bed, her daughter in Connor's arms, Marge cutting pie on the windowsill tray, because Marge brought a pie server as a matter of course. The sleet against the windows, the warm light, the sound of Grace making small, discovering sounds at the edge of sleep. She thought, this is what I was building toward, not this specific room, not these specific people. Something like this, something that felt like you could put your full weight on it and it would hold. Spring came early to Millhaven that year. The tulips in the window boxes were up by late March. Marge started her seedlings in the back room. Connor built a raised bed in the garden behind the shop, which he said was for vegetables, and Marge said was a completely transparent excuse to spend more time nearby. The federal investigation into Daniel Hartwell's financial affairs resulted, in April, in a plea agreement. Reduced charges, financial penalties, community service. His name was on the public record in connection with the scheme exactly as Claire had required in her divorce terms. Patricia, the first wife, called Claire in February. They spoke for 2 hours. Claire told Diane afterward that the call had been, in equal parts, devastating and necessary, and that she thought Patricia should speak with a good attorney in her own state about certain aspects of her NDA. Diane said, "I can recommend someone." Claire passed the Vermont bar exam in March. Her first case was a referral from a women's shelter network, a woman who had called from a gas station somewhere in New Hampshire with no plan and no destination and a hospital bag in the back seat. Claire drove to meet her herself. She was setting up a small family law practice with an office on Millhaven's Main Street, 2 doors down from the pie shop. The sign in the window said, simply, Hartwell Law. One morning, in May, she was at her desk going through files while Grace slept in the small carrier that Marge had attached to the office door handle with a bungee cord and called the reception system. Through the window, she could see Connor across the street at the hardware store, talking to someone, gesturing toward the building with the ease of a man discussing plans. He had been expanding his carpentry business. He had a waiting list. He looked up and saw her through the window. He raised a hand in the unhurried way that was entirely his. She raised hers. There was nothing dramatic about it. No orchestra, no sudden rain, just two people who had found each other at a gas station in the dark, metaphorically and then practically, and who had chosen, daily, in small and unspectacular ways, to stay. That evening, she sat in the back garden with her journal, while Grace slept in the carrier against her chest. The cardinal was on the fence. Marge was talking to her seedlings through the back window. Connor was somewhere in the building, the sound of him working, steady and quiet. She opened the journal to a fresh page. She wrote, "I used to think strength meant never breaking. Now I think it means knowing exactly what you are willing to break for. I broke for Grace. I broke for the woman I was before I learned to make myself smaller. I broke for every version of myself that looked at the life she was living and thought quietly, in the space between sleeping and waking, I deserve more than this." She paused. She wrote, "The USB drive is in Grace's memory box now, next to her hospital bracelet and a dried flower from Marge's window box, and a photograph of the four of us in the pie shop on Thanksgiving. Marge in her apron, and Connor with Grace asleep against his shoulder, and me looking at them both with an expression I recognize now as the specific look of a person who cannot quite believe their own life." She looked up at the evening sky over Vermont. She wrote, "What I would tell the woman on Route 93, driving north in the snow with no plan. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to take the evidence you quietly spent a year collecting and walk out a door and not look back. You do not have to wait until it is worse. You do not have to earn the right to begin again." She looked at Grace's sleeping face, at the small, strong hands. She wrote, "Your instinct is not anxiety. It is information. Your discomfort is not a character flaw. It is your intelligence, working correctly. And the life that is waiting for you on the other side of the hardest decision you will ever make is not a consolation prize. It is the actual thing, the real thing, the one you are always supposed to be living." She closed the journal. The cardinal flew away and came back. Marge was still talking to her seedlings. Connor appeared in the back doorway with 2 mugs of tea and the slight uncertainty he always had about interrupting. She said, "Come sit." He came and sat beside her on the garden bench. He was careful not to wake Grace. She leaned, just slightly, against his shoulder. He did not say anything. He handed her the tea, and they sat in the May evening while the light went slowly gold and then pink, and then the deep particular blue of Vermont and almost summer. From somewhere inside, Marge's voice, "Connor, I need you to move the seedling trays before you get comfortable out there." Connor said, without raising his voice significantly, "I am comfortable out here." Marge, "I can hear that, and I don't care." Connor stood up, unhurried, and went inside. He was back in 4 minutes. He sat down again. He said, "The seedlings are moved." Claire said, "Thank you for moving the seedlings. Someone had to." She smiled. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. 2 months later, there was a young woman who came into Marge's pie and coffee on a Tuesday afternoon with eyes that had been crying and hands that were not steady. She was carrying 1 bag. She asked about the room for rent. She had seen the sign in the window. Marge looked at Claire, who was at the counter with a file. Claire put the file down. She pulled out a chair. She said, "Sit down. Let me get you some coffee. Fair warning, the pie here is genuinely exceptional." She set a mug on the counter. "And you don't have to explain anything tonight. You just have to sit here and be warm." The young woman sat down. She wrapped both hands around the mug. Her shoulders dropped, just slightly, the way shoulders drop when they have been held tight for a long time, and something in the room tells them they are allowed to let go. Marge appeared from the back. She looked at the young woman. She looked at Claire. She said, "I'll cut some pie." Outside, Millhaven went about its evening, the hardware store closing, the cardinal on the fence, Connor's truck pulling into the alley, the light over the mountains going slow and golden, the way good things go, without drama, without announcement. The bell above the door chimed. Grace, strapped to Claire's chest in the carrier, opened her eyes. She looked at the young woman the way new people are looked at by babies, with complete and fearless attention, as if to say, "I see you. You are here." That is enough to begin with. That is more than enough. Editorial disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment, emotional reflection, and storytelling purposes. All characters, names, locations, and events are entirely fictional and are not intended to represent any real individuals or situations. If any element of this story resonates with your personal experience and you need support, please reach out to a trusted professional or counseling resource in your area.